We both work on the threat intel team at Facebook, focusing on threats to what we call the community, and or as most of us refer to as users. And today I'm going to talk about some of the work that we did throughout the US midterm. Olga was focused mainly on the Russia effort, I was focused mainly on the Iran effort, and a lot of lessons learned that we had from identifying the information operations and how they're changing through the past 2 years that we've been working on this problem. So what is the Community Threat Intelligence Team? This team was created just to focus solely on threats to users and invest those efforts on the different threats that face users of the platform, as opposed to threats that face both users and employees of the platform. It more focused on specialized problem sets that only affect Facebook users, and the problem set that Olga and I focus on is the information operations problem set. We define information operations as the identification and disruption of coordinated inauthentic campaigns, which mean to distort political sentiment. So why do information operations occur on social media, right? As what's been great is we've had some great intros thus far on information operations and influence campaigns that have been around for forever, right? The idea that you're trying to distort political sentiment using different forms, social media, are different forms of media, but more just presenting false information and amplifying false information in order to get people to act and react in a certain way. We talk about social media platforms that provide the level of access that has never been seen before. Access to billions of users, and billions of users that are not at all limited by geographic distance and or technology now in a sense. It also, social media encourages a type of discussion that is not that opens it up to a lot of different people across the world. The fact that a lot of places where social media operates do not have free press, do not have open media, and do not have options for engaging in open political discourse against their government makes it right for information operations, because people this is how they consume news, this is how they consume information, and this is how they discuss political issues regionally and globally. Facebook is also designed to encourage community, which I know is one of we don't need necessarily our mission statements in this room, but the fact that our product is there to encourage people to communicate with one another, to share content with one another, and therefore those who are trying to manipulate said content have an open platform, but also have people who are eager to seek this, eager to share it. We also have so many users in social media across the world that are using this to engage in a lot of civic discourse. The fact that now it's opened it up to where people can engage in different political discussions and also consume different media sources from all over the world that weren't accessible to them before. And Olga's going to talk more about our policies that we implement in order to combat some of these conflicts that we've engaged in.
Yeah, so in order to deal with some of the issues that Madeline was describing that are really prevalent on social media or in media in general, we have to have a policy to deal with it. And so the policy that we have, and this is literally verbatim what you can find, anyone in this room or whether you're a Facebook user or not can publicly go find that information. You can read the community standards, which include this, but many, many other things, ways in which we kind of enforce against various violations that we find on our platform. So this is the current language that exists, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to change. One of the things that we've learned over time is that this is a constantly evolving problem set, and so we have to adapt to that and find ways in which we can change the language so that we can either narrow it so that it actually makes sense and doesn't create room for overinterpretation, but also so that we can actually take action, which is some of what we do on our team. But what does coordinated and inauthentic behavior actually mean? It sounds like kind of a buzzwordy way to refer to this problem, but why aren't we using some of the terms that you're familiar with, like information operations or disinformation? I think that we need to focus on coordinated and authentic behavior in particular because it helps us understand what it is that we're looking at. It's the kind of activity that we identify. So I'll read directly from the slide, but it's a network of people or pages pages on Facebook that work together to mislead others about who they are and what they are doing. But point by point, coordinated, inauthentic behavior means that when we look at this as analysts, we have to find that coordination. That coordination can sometimes be really, really easily visible to us, whether it's some sort of network connection that you might find in some other problem sets, or it's a lot more difficult to find because someone's a lot better at operational security, and they're not necessarily operating from the same infrastructure, and so then you have to use sort of TTP-like behavior assessments to understand whether a group is coordinated. The inauthentic piece we'll talk a little bit more soon, but the idea is that you're inauthentically representing yourself. You're misleading people, and you're not just doing it by creating some sort of fake account or something like that, but you're doing it with an intention to mislead. Finally, behavior. Again, as I said earlier, one of the important things for us is to focus on behavior. It also allows us to not focus on content, because this is something you've probably heard from a lot of people at our company, but we try not to operate on content because we don't want to be the arbiters of truth. And that's not just a talking point. That's really important because when we look at this, content can go and be shared from one particular place and then be reshared by someone else. Is that person part of that coordinated and authentic behavior operation? Probably not, but we have to look at what their activity is in order to actually understand that.
One thing just to add about coordinated inauthentic behavior, a thing that we discuss on the team all the time is the proof to show that this activity didn't happen by accident. You didn't arrive on these IPs by accident. You didn't share this content by accident. You weren't necessarily just a chain sharing the information. Like, you were actually somebody that was actively engaged in encouraging said sharing and or said operation.
That's right. And related to that, when we talk about fake and inauthentic accounts, why does the word fake account, why does that terminology not really reflect what we're looking for here? Because fake accounts can be detected by classifiers. In fact, our technology internally, our detection, takes down millions of accounts every single day. And they do it almost at inception in many cases, which is a really good thing. That means that bots are not as much of a problem, because you have to create a real persona to really get around that particular detection. And that's important to make that distinction between bots and trolls. So a lot of times they're used interchangeably around the world. They're used interchangeably by people talking about this space. Definitions are important, but as many of you know, bots are automated. They're machines. They're designed to repeat behaviors, and they do it at a large scale. In order to conduct an information operation, you don't necessarily need to have a massive scale to have a big impact. So you can have a whole bunch of people sitting in a room at a troll factory, and you have to build up personas to actually engage with people. If you're trying to build community, you're trying to actually talk to other human beings and make them feel like you are human too. And oftentimes there is a human sitting behind that computer as well. And so a lot of these more sophisticated actors do avoid those classifiers because maybe they've been caught by them before and learned some lessons, or maybe they, have better built-up personas. They act more like a real user. Maybe they are a real user and they've turned that account into something else. So this is what we're here to talk about primarily, right? You guys saw the word democracy, you saw the word elections and Facebook, and you wanted to hear about it. So, what I'm going to talk about is some of the challenges that we have when discerning threats to elections at Facebook in particular. So why do we focus on elections? They are important in and of themselves, but they're also really important because for the problem set that we look at, it's about political motivation. And elections are a highly charged political period of time. So if you're someone who's trying to build an information operation, you're probably going to try to use that time period because you're going to get the most bang for your buck during that time. So if you're smart, that's what you're going to do. And if we're smart, we're going to look and make sure that we monitor some of the upticks in activity around that period. So, one of the things that, we look at and we also deal with constantly is that, a lot of people who are highly engaged on social media, who are really, really interested in civic issues, they're activists, they're using social platforms to try to push their ideas, they can look on the surface just like someone who's working in a troll farm. And that's by design, right? The people who are working to try to disrupt political discourse are trying to look like that activist. Sometimes they're trying to co-opt those activists. And that's why it's really, really important for us to try to look at those behaviors and not content, as we said earlier, because some of this stuff will look identical on the surface, but we dig deeper and we try to understand what is the intent behind this behavior, as Madeline was saying. What can we discern from what they do on the back end that can give us some sense of, okay, they're not just doing this because they really, really care about this particular social movement. Finally, one of the things that you'll find, and if you look at some of the examples, which we'll show you later, is that even though the election time period is so important and that's highly politically charged, it also is not necessarily information operations during that time won't focus on the election. You won't see the word election necessarily. You can't use that always to find this activity. You won't always find the word vote or don't vote or care about this candidate or here's a picture of that one and all of that. Some of it has a lot more to do with the divisive issues that these accounts are trying to amplify. It's about trying to get into the social fabric and the political fabric of that particular time period and not necessarily trying to affect the outcome of that election. So this is a really good example. I don't know how many of you took that New York Times quiz of can you spot the deceptive Facebook post? So I have a number of friends who've taken it. Someone mentioned to me over the weekend that they tried to take it and they did really badly. They did not, they thought, I got this. I've been, reading a lot of news. I can figure it out. Just try to take a quiz and look at things side by side and say which one is inauthentic post. But the reality is they didn't do so well because it's hard. Because when you look at these two particular pictures, they are pushing some of the same messages, but someone is doing it for authentic reason because they actually care about that particular issue. And someone is doing it because they want the people who care about it to be even more divided. And so I think this really nails down the point of when we're trying to discern this activity on our platform, when others are trying to look at this externally, on the surface, it's going to be really, really hard to tell. And I'm not saying that we have some sort of monopoly on identifying this activity, but it helps to understand what else this actor set is doing.
And so as a result, we've had a lot of lessons learned about how to combat this, because like she said, we can't be the monopoly on all of this. And we could all say in this room, that's the reason we're all here, partnerships are super critical to what we do. We work with some of you in this room very closely. We work with a lot of government law enforcement agencies. And I think for the IO side, it's really been important for us to reach out to academics and researchers and people who understand on the ground how information works and how news works and how media is spread in different parts of the world. Another thing that's been brought up that I really feel passionately about is having a regional understanding of said area where IO is being conducted is very crucial in understanding and identifying an information operation. We also have found that increased transparency has really helped us in improving our detection and getting greater deterrence, where we put out we've talked about this whole argument of deterrence, right? Causing friction and making it more difficult for actors to continue doing the same operations over and over. And increased transparency has also allowed us to gain a lot of leads and a lot of insight from people who identify what they think are information operations and how we can better detect them going forward. We have also found that when you're investigating information operations, you find things that you don't mean to find, but are also very bad and damaging, right? So we find when looking for foreign interference that we have some financially motivated operations, which focus on selling Ray-Bans and focus on getting people to do clickbait and do a lot of other things. We found domestic actors who are trying to sway political opinion and conduct CIB in a different way than we expected. And we just find spam. As Olga said, you find a bunch of fake accounts when you start digging into these things, and while they're not coordinated, they clearly violate our spam policies. So it's required a lot of interesting interactions with the company and different teams on what piece of the pie is ours, and then how do we also continue to be a place where we can identify these actors and forward them on to the right people, but continue to maintain integrity on the platform. We've also found that there's a really big difference across information operations campaigns. So Olga and I both have different regional expertise and have seen a huge difference with Iranian information operations and Russian information operations. And we're continuing to explore this in other parts of the world. And while some of things are the same, there's a lot that's different. Countries that are conducting information operations see these in a very different light. And while we don't know their exact intention, we have seen very different types of content spread in these information operations campaigns. Particularly for the Iranian set that we have made public, we showed a lot that there is content that explicitly supports Iranian interests. Their geopolitical interests across the world tend to be what they're proliferating in content, and that leads us to some type of conclusion that possibly they're looking at swaying things based on their geopolitical initiatives. Whereas with the Russian information operations, it's been a very different type of content that we've seen being spread, where it looks like they're spreading content on both sides of the aisle and therefore are just really trying to just sow discord, as other people have also mentioned. That's pretty traditional for Russian information operations. We're also seeing a lot of different initiatives across Latin America and across parts of Asia where they have also very different intentions in how they want to manipulate political sentiment. We have also seen that they use the platform very differently. While originally we had the IRA and focused heavily, you'll see some actors focus heavily on ads, some actors focus heavily on pages, others completely don't focus on those type parts of the platform at all. And we have to be constantly vigilant on very different parts of our platform and how it could be manipulated. So we're not just talking about groups or pages or ads, but also WhatsApp, also Instagram. All of these things talk to each other, and these are all different mechanisms for actors to conduct these information operations. And therefore, we also can't just take this is the formula for identifying a confidence interval or identifying badness for this set and plug it into an algorithm and say, okay, give us everything else, and that automatically those results are part of an IO set. Sorry, I kind of skipped a step, but the point is mainly that you can't take all of those indicators that you had from a first set as far as TTPs, as far as behaviors, and then plug it in to just assume you're going to find those behaviors and automatically find the next IO campaign. It just hasn't really worked that way as far as we keep going through this. There are usually some consistent TTPs as you dig deeper into different actor sets. But mainly when we look at across country and across platform, that really doesn't pan out the way that we think it would. But there has been some similarities, right? As Olga talked about with inauthentic personas, these inauthentic personas across all of these IO campaigns have a human being sitting behind them typically. You have somebody who's engaged in some behavior, and it's not detected by our algorithms, right? We have algorithms that take down millions of accounts every day that are clearly just fake, clearly machines, and all of these actors are becoming well-versed in how to get around that and therefore take the time to actually create these inauthentic personas. We also see that they make very interesting grammatical and language mistakes when they start to participate in political discourse and try to amplify things. With the Iran side, we've seen like some Google Translate issues, and same with on the Russia side, some issues with the Russian language. And it's also exposed how much knowing the regional language is very helpful in identifying these operations across parts of the world. We've also seen where they typically rely on content that has already been created for them. So that's, again, where we can't go back to simply relying on what the content is as part of an influence operation, because they really like to just copy content. So memes, even news articles, photos, things that are very much seen across that would not seem like an information operation to the user, and therefore, with just the content don't qualify. They tend to reuse content over and over again. We also see them co-opt different parts of communities to get their message spread. So we've seen them try to co-opt in different event spaces or reach out to individuals via the platform, or try to reach out to different groups, hoping that if they gain someone who has a large following as an amplifier, that this will then amplify said message.
Which is something that Camille was saying earlier when you're trying to build audience and build into a network that really already exists.
Yeah.
So when we've seen some actors that try to create an event on their own and then get 0 people attending that event, realize that maybe that's not going to work so well. You got to find someone else who's actually created one and who already has a large following and activist network.
So this is kind of some good examples. I would say their meme game is not up to the level of FireEye, so they need to get better about that. But They definitely, as I pointed out before, try to reuse content that looks really similar. Let me see if I can get the pointer to work. So we've also seen, sorry, one step I skipped, one bullet I just skipped, is we've seen them also try to co-opt and pretend to be media organizations and or NGOs. Obviously, this is to proliferate their message, to get around classifiers, and also to just fool the average user into thinking they're a legitimate media organization. I've seen some claims that concerns where an Iranian media organization actually had very legitimate followers, like high-ranking followers of a page, and there's been concern like, are we sure this page is fake? Because there are so many real people who believe this is a legitimate media organization. So it's something to be aware of, that they know what our limits are, they know where they may get more protections, and they know where we may overlook things and are trying to take advantage of that. So this is one that we saw that was, oh no, wrong thing. Sorry, clicked way too far. This was one that was an Iranian one pretending to be a media organization on the right-hand side. We saw the same thing with the Russia side. We also saw, obviously, them use some created memes that were already going around, as you see here, with like the Kavanaugh hearing. Oh my gosh, sorry, lesson learned. And then also just them using different parts of the platform. Yeah, that works too. Using different parts of the platform as well to proliferate this, but Instagram. And then they like to use a lot of words that typically make them seem like we're free press. So united, what is another one? Progressive, liberty, all of these words that will clearly show that they are legitimate media organizations. They like to really hard hit those words. So what are kind of the challenges that we have, and how does this compare to traditional information security? I have an information security background, and I found there's some really good lessons across both sides. First, that we have an interesting challenge. A big difference is attribution, and how you attribute InfoSec versus information operations has been a really interesting challenge and debate in the community, and something that we're constantly going through. A big one that we've recently encountered is having to explain that IP and infrastructure ownership is not necessary to conduct an information operation, and is actually the opposite stance. You kind of don't want to own your infrastructure with an information operation. With a traditional espionage operation, right, it's required that you own the infrastructure so you can view all of the extracted information or have access to said information which you've extracted from your victim. But in information operations, you want to blend in. You don't want people to see your infrastructure as particularly different or as particularly noisy, and you want to be, and so you'll see a lot of people get on IP addresses, share who is domain information, and kind of ensure that they are not the sole controllers of the infrastructure space in which they reside. So that's been an interesting challenge, is like, how do we attribute this back, and where do we define this group outside of traditional InfoSec methodology? We also are really in a hurry to act before we can attribute, as far as the fact that we tend to focus on takedowns as quickly as possible because of the potential impact that these pages can have in the viewership. And so our attribution, as far as which group is decided to and which organization is necessarily responsible for a said thing, is not necessary for us to act. That also is why CIB exists, and a big implementation behind it is the fact that your behavior is what makes you a violation, not necessarily your origin. We also, one thing that's really similar though, is there's still that issue of differentiating the really bad people from the noise. So same in traditional espionage activity, where you have tons of alerts, right, that go on every single day, where you're trying to block domains, block IPs, and you have all of these alerts that traditionally come in all the time, and you're trying to find that really bad guy and those really small people that are trying to hide in the alarms. It's the same with information operations, right? People are not typically trying to be information operators who have the largest following, who have the most scale, and who make the most noise. Nobody who's running an information operation is hoping their one page rivals CNN. They're hoping that they can have a bunch of different pages and have a network of activity that is just under the radar from those really high value those really high value assets, right? But it's the same with espionage, where people are trying to send malware and they're trying to remain under the radar. And while you have millions of email logs and millions of different events to go through, you're looking for that one piece that's the worst, that's leaving you like the most vulnerable. So that's one thing I found that really translates to those two pieces. And I think that also identifying TTPs is just a huge piece of both the InfoSec and information operations community. So a lot of this room have heard of the pyramid of pain, and that's right, and the whole point of when you can really identify those TTPs and really understand your actor is when you can be most effective in stopping them. And it's the same on both sides of the aisle here, where we're looking at what are the TTPs that different parts of the world are using, that these specific actors are using, not necessarily what those regions are using. And then you kind of try to learn from those TTPs to continue identifying future actor sets. And I'll turn this back to Olga for all of the news stories you all have heard about recently.
I'm not going to necessarily talk about the news stories, but I think that one of the things that I said early on was that we're evolving as we understand and identify more information operations. A lot of us have sort of changed our understanding of what that is in this room, but also in particular on our team. And so this is just a series of disruptions, as we call them, that actions that we've taken. Getting time. So we've sort of, if you watch the trajectory from one disruption to another, we've learned some lessons. We've been able to apply, some of those lessons to subsequent actions that we've taken. We've also sort of learned about how, transparency can help us to sort of shine light on this problem, and how we also work with, partners to actually either shine the light on the problem or even take further action that we can't take as a social platform, but, work in coordination with others to find the right time to do a takedown, find the right way in which we do it, and that's why we're really excited to be here in this room to talk to all of you, because I think this is going to sound cheesy, but I think that we have to work on this together, and it does have to be a whole of society response. As a former journalist, I think a lot about the information environment and protecting it, because I think it's really, really important for people to have a place to communicate with one another and to also trust where their information comes from and to trust the institutions that are making sure that, that information is accurate.
With that, we'll take questions.
So you briefly mentioned domestic actors. I'm wondering to what extent does the Community Threat Intelligence team actually research domestic-born influence operations?
I can take that?
Yeah, go for it.
So one of the things that we found, when Madeline was speaking about, when we look for one violation, we tend to find another. So as we focus on the behavior, coordinated authentic behavior, we're going to find domestic activity. Whether it's domestic activity in the United States or in other places around the world, it's inevitable that it's going to be part of our detection. And so we have worked on domestic operations. It can be complicated because that scale of the lines between what something looks like on the surface gets a lot harder when you're looking in a domestic space. But that is something that we work on, and we're trying to understand how we can work with some of our partner teams that engage in, they're looking at civic engagement on our platform and are, protecting elections integrity a little bit more on a broad scale to see who is best to address this issue.
Great. I had a question. So understandably, your talk has focused largely on efforts targeting the West and the U.S. in particular, troll farms and things like that. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how Facebook manages disinformation operations in other areas that come directly from the state. For instance, in the Philippines or Myanmar, where coordinated disinformation is shared directly from the government.
So I can answer that. So we're definitely, this is just our focus area. We have other analysts that focus on different regions, specifically disinformation. And that's also where we go back to our policy and our ability to enforce under that. I don't know if you noticed, it doesn't say foreign coordinated inauthentic behavior for that exact reason. And so we're definitely still addressing those issues, and we're putting a lot of effort into those parts of the world as well. It just wasn't necessarily addressed in this talk.
Great, thanks.
I'll just add one thing. So if you, I think Camille mentioned this earlier, but one of the kind of less discussed and less studied parts of the Internet Research Agency work was that there was a largely domestic focused operation targeting people in Russia, targeting Russian political issues. And that's something that was one of our disruptions that was up on the board there. And that is a perfect example where sometimes you can watch someone who's engaged in information operations sort of try it out at home first, or try it out in what Russia refers to as its near abroad, before kind of looking to other parts of the world. And so that's a really good example of how this can occur domestically, and how a government or a government-associated entity would be interested in manipulating debate at home.
We've also, we've had takedowns for what you're talking about with Myanmar and Brazil in the past year.
I wanted to ask about, since rarely do information operators limit themselves to one platform, is there a view from your perspective, especially over in Silicon Valley, of working with other social media, partnering with other social media companies like Twitter, for example, in addition to partnering with the government and private companies represented here?
Yeah, so that was actually one of the things that was on that slide, but maybe we didn't address it enough. So yeah, it's really, really important because cross-platform proliferation, understanding it, how maybe someone first created an account on a different platform and then use that to amplify the content from the current platform that they're working on. That's really, really important, and it's actually something that we do quite a bit, sometimes informally and sometimes more formally, engaging with people at other companies, because when we identify something, we want to be able to share it with our partners so that they can see, okay, well, do you see it, do you see this happening on your platform? Can you find some sort of additional attribution that we couldn't on our own? So it's really, we've done it quite a bit, and I think we're continuing to evolve that practice. It's great to be here. So.
Only gonna happen more. Definitely not going the opposite way, for sure.
Quick question. If you look at the trend line over time from an offensive point of view, I guess in 15, 16, there was a very good return on investment, a lot of bang for the buck in terms of disinformation operations on all platforms. Today, that's very different. So how do you see the trend line continuing? Have we seen peak disinformation on Facebook? Or do you see even more resources being poured into this problem? And a version of that question is probably harder to answer. How does the situation look like on WhatsApp?
Thanks for the softball. Really appreciate it.
Do you want to start?
I can start. I mean, I think that they will just continue to evolve. I don't know if we can answer that we've seen peak disinformation. I think we're going to continue to see actors to get better. They're going to improve and they're going to change what they're doing. And so that's kind of always the issue is, can we beat them before they continue to gain a bang for their buck? We're seeing a lot of, WhatsApp is going to be a continuing problem, and it's something we're trying to address across many different parts of the world right now. And I think that's just going to be a huge challenge going forward. I know we don't have concrete answers. It's something we're all discussing, and it's something the cross-platform use and disinformation and our definitions of coordination across different parts of the platform is how are we going to identify then this activity?
I'll just add that I think one of the goals, I think, that when you're detecting and disrupting some of this activity is to try to make it harder, right? You raise the cost for what someone's trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. And that raised cost might mean that someone might go to a messaging platform where it isn't as easy to get some sort of messaging to go viral. It isn't as easy to reach a lot of people, but it's getting easier, right? And so as we do these disruptions, we've sort of hit people right where it hurts, and they're going to try to find a way to, I don't think any of this is going to stop, and that's actually it segues into an important point that I think, there's a lot of conversations that can happen around, like, we've got to stop this from happening. I think most of the people in this room can understand that this is not something that you stop. You're talking about the 1930s. This is something that you can only, sort of make the cost go up and try to get them off our platform, off the internet, and back to newspapers and pamphlets if possible. Just make it a lot harder to do this.
referenced domestic information operations by white supremacists, white nationalists here in the United States. What is Facebook doing to raise the cost, for their using Facebook as a platform? What is your process currently?
That's outside of our AOR, really. We don't typically deal with those.
Yeah,
that
so
type
there
of
are folks at our company that do address those issues. We're not the experts on it, but what I'll say is that when we make it difficult to engage in a certain type of activity, hopefully we're making it difficult for anyone, no matter where they come from, who's trying to inauthentically kind of amplify divisive debate. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's thank him.